Have you ever stopped to think about whether money could actually work without banks or even governments? I mean, really think about it. Well, that's the massive idea at the heart of Bitcoin. Today, we're going to cut through all the noise and give you a real foundational guide to the world's first and still most famous digital currency.
So, here's what we're going to cover. We'll kick things off with the basics. What even is Bitcoin? Then we'll get into the mystery of who created it. From there, we'll dig into the very specific rules that make it totally different from any money you've ever used, see how a transaction actually works, and finally, understand the brilliant system that keeps it all secure and, basically unchangeable.
All right, so let's jump right in with the biggest question of them all.
What is Bitcoin, really? You hear about it all the time, but beyond the crazy headlines, what are we actually talking about here?
Okay, so at its heart, Bitcoin is the very first cryptocurrency. Now, that word might sound a little intimidating, but the idea is actually pretty simple. It's a digital currency that's secured using something called cryptography. And that fancy encryption is what makes it almost impossible to fake or to spend the same money twice.
Now, here's a small detail that's actually super important to understand. It's the difference between a capital B and a lowercase b. When you see Bitcoin with a capital B, we're talking about the whole system, the entire decentralized network. But when you see it with a lowercase b, that refers to the currency itself, the actual unit you can own, which is also called BTC.
And that network is decentralized. Honestly, this is probably its most revolutionary feature. It means there's no single person, no company, no government in charge. It's not owned by anyone. So instead of putting your trust in a bank, you're trusting a global, open network that anyone with an internet connection can be a part of. I mean, back in 2009, this was a mind-blowing idea.
So who on earth came up with such a radical concept? Well, that question leads us to one of the biggest and most fascinating mysteries in the entire tech world.
The creator, or maybe it was a group of creators, we don't know, is known only by this name, Satoshi Nakamoto. They launched the project in late 2008, right in the middle of that huge financial crisis, a time when trust in the banking system was at rock bottom. And here's the wild part. To this day, nobody knows who Satoshi Nakamoto really is. It's a total mystery.
So, this mysterious origin is just the start. Let's get into the unique rules that were literally coded into Bitcoin from the very beginning, rules that make it fundamentally different from the money we use every single day.
A really great way to wrap your head around it is to think of it like email, but for money. Seriously, when you send an email, it goes straight from you to the other person, right? There's no post office in the middle. Bitcoin works the same way. It's peer-to-peer. It just cuts out the middleman, like a bank, which gives people total control over their own money.
And this brings us to one of its most powerful rules. Unlike traditional currencies, the ones that governments can print more and more of, there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin. That's it. That number is hard-coded into the system. This built-in scarcity is exactly why people call it digital gold.
So you might be wondering, if there's a fixed supply, where do the new coins even come from? Well, they get introduced into the system through a process called mining. Basically, super powerful computers, the miners, compete to solve really complex math problems. When a miner finds the solution and discovers a new block of transactions, they get a reward in brand new Bitcoin.
But, and this is key, that reward isn't constant. To make sure that scarcity is enforced, the code has this crucial event built in called the halving. Roughly every 4 years, the reward for mining gets cut in half. It started at 50 Bitcoin per block, then it dropped to 25, then 12.5, and it keeps going. This guarantees that the creation of new Bitcoin slows down over time on a totally predictable schedule, until the very last one is mined sometime around the year 2140.
Okay, so we've covered the what and the why. Now let's get into the how. How does a transaction actually get from your wallet across the network into someone else?
The whole thing really runs on two main parts. First, you've got the Bitcoin network. This is just a huge global system of computers, we call them nodes, that are all running the Bitcoin software. And second, you have the Bitcoin blockchain. The easiest way to think of this is like a giant public digital checkbook or a ledger, where every single transaction that has ever happened is recorded for the whole world to see.
So, what exactly is a node? It's really just any computer out there that's running the Bitcoin software. All of these nodes work together to form the network, and they're constantly checking transactions and making sure everybody's playing by the rules. And again, the cool part is that anyone can decide to run a node and participate.
So to send or receive Bitcoin, you need a digital wallet. And that wallet is controlled by two different kinds of cryptographic keys. First, you've got a public key. This works kind of like your bank account number. It's a public address people can use to send you money. But then you have a private key. This is a top secret code that lets you access and spend your funds.
And if that sounds a little abstract, don't worry. Here is the absolute easiest way to remember it. Think of your public key as your home mailing address. It's fine for people to know it so they can send you mail. But your private key, that is your front door key. It's the one thing you keep totally secret because it's the only way to get inside your house and access your stuff. You never, ever share your private key with anyone.
Okay, this brings us to a really fascinating question. If there's no bank, no CEO, no central authority, what stops people from just cheating the system? How is it all kept secure?
The answer is this absolutely brilliant security model called proof of work. Instead of trusting a person or a company, the network is secured by pure math and energy. Miners have to use a massive amount of computing power and, by extension, electricity to solve a really hard mathematical puzzle. The first one to solve it proves they've done the work, and they earn the right to add the next block of transactions to the chain. This makes trying to cheat just outrageously expensive and difficult.
This whole puzzle is based on something called a cryptographic hash. It sounds technical, but just think of it like a unique digital fingerprint. You put some data in and you get a special one-of-a-kind code out. And if you change the input even a tiny bit, like changing one single letter, the output, the fingerprint, changes completely and unpredictably. So miners are basically just trying to find a very specific kind of fingerprint, and because it's random, the only way to find it is to guess trillions of times a second until one of them finally gets lucky.
So, all of this, the decentralized network, the intense competition, all that complex math, it all leads us to the final and maybe the most powerful feature of the Bitcoin blockchain.
Here's the deal. Once a transaction is confirmed and added to that blockchain, it is essentially set in stone. It's there forever. Why? Well, a new block gets added about every 10 minutes, and every single node all over the world keeps an identical copy of that entire ledger. So to go back and change just one old transaction, an attacker would have to somehow redo all that difficult proof of work for that block and all the blocks that came after it, all while moving faster than the entire global network combined. It's pretty much computationally impossible, which makes the history of transactions immutable, or in other words, unchangeable.
When you boil it all down, Bitcoin introduced this just incredible idea, a system for sending value that isn't built on trusting institutions, but on verifiable math and open source code. It replaces the need for a central authority with a global, decentralized agreement. And this simple, yet incredibly powerful idea leaves us all with a pretty profound question to think about. What happens when money truly has no one in charge?